Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to round 4 coverage of my games from the 2017 Western States Open. So round 4 started at 7 o'clock on Saturday. Actually, I think in the last video I said 6 o'clock. But no, 7 o'clock in the evening on Saturday. My score so far was 2.5 out of 3. So doing pretty well. And in fact, I was on board 2. So you know when you're on one of the top 2 boards in your section, board 2 in the B section, then you know you're doing pretty well. And I was able to get out. I had a nice break between rounds. So I was feeling pretty good. My rating for this game, I had the white pieces. My rating for the tournament was 1765, and my opponent's rating was 1722. So the strongest player I've faced so far in this tournament. But he has the black pieces. So I start off with d4. He goes d5. I go c4. And he goes e6. So I got a standard queen's gambit declined. I go knight c3, and he goes knight to f6. So all very typical moves. I want to show one thing though. Because we transpose into the Tarrasch defense, but we don't start out in a Tarrasch. The Tarrasch defense is the move c5 here. And just to show this line, one of the main ways of continuing, I think the main way of continuing, is to just take. He takes, develop the knight, and then the main move for black here is knight to f6, after which white normally plays g3. And that position has been seen many times. But knight to c6 is also a move in the Tarrasch. It's like a second or third choice in this position. And we get exactly this position later on in this game. So I'm calling it a Tarrasch defense, although we get to this position by a different move order. So in this position, right after we put the pawns up and I just played knight c3, he played knight f6 immediately, and then I go knight f3, then he goes c5. So in this position is actually known as the semi-Tarrasch, and taking is again one of the main ways to play here. And then the semi-Tarrasch, the most popular move, and the reason for bringing the knight out first, is so black has the option of taking with the knight. So knight takes d5, and then white doesn't have to play this way. White can just hold on to the center with a move like e3. But and the kind of interesting way to play, most aggressive way to play maybe, is to push on with e4. I think this is also the main line. Takes, but there are several valid lines at that point, I just wanted to say. And then takes and takes. And this is a pretty interesting position. I mean, you could say nominally that white's a little better because white has an extra pawn in the center and a little more space. But well, this d pawn is actually a little bit fragile. And there's no other pawns that can support it. Also, this queen side is wide open, so there are all these checks against the king, and very few pieces have been developed. So it's kind of a interesting position from here, but maybe white is slightly better. In the game, let's see, let's go back. He went, instead of taking with the knight and continuing in the semi-Tarrasch, he takes with the pawn. And if we compare this position to this position, you can see they're identical. You can't tell what I'm clicking, but I'm clicking the two different variations. This is the variation we got to from the Tarrasch, where he just played knight f6, and this is the variation we got to from the semi-Tarrasch, where he took with the pawn, and where I took and he took back with the pawn. So however we get here, I'm calling this the Tarrasch. I play the normal move g3 against the Tarrasch. But there is another option here which is kind of interesting and maybe puts the question to this move order a little bit. Bishop to g5 is, although it's not the most popular move, it was down in the list, in the database. It was like a third choice in the opening book. But it was the top choice of the chess engine because after this, the chess engine wants to play like this. This move is the engine suggestion, and the way to continue with the biggest advantage, according to the chess engine, takes, and then e4. Kind of a funny move and not one I would have thought of. But, well, the idea is that black takes that pawn. You can throw in this check first, and, well, the knight comes forward to block the check. It's probably better than retreating the bishop, and then you can take here. And the queen is going to have to go back. And the material is all even. The center is completely open. You could imagine these pawns might get exchanged off, so things would be completely open. But white has the edge in development. White's going to be able to castle, whereas black has to, after moving the queen, is still going to need another move before he's going to be ready to castle. So it looks like that's pretty interesting for white. And so maybe that's a way to play in this position after we get to this by either move order, whether it's a semi-Tarrasch or a Tarrasch, where he's played this knight to f6 move. Bishop to g5 is something to consider. But I just continue with my normal setup against the Tarrasch, which also is the top move in the database. So g3. The idea with g3, by the way, is you're going to put a bishop here, and you're going to just try and get pressure on that d pawn, which can't be defended by another pawn, right? The e pawn is gone, and the c pawn is passed by. So that's white's idea here, is just to put a little pressure on the center there. So he goes knight c6, and we're now back into a very standard position of the Tarrasch, position that's been seen many times before. And we're both following all of the main moves up to this point. And right here, I play a move which is not the main move. So this is, probably about as far as I know the opening. In any case, so I wander off the beaten track here. I'm starting to think on my own, try and figure things out. One way of playing here is I'll show you the second choice in the database, which is kind of interesting. And something you should always think about in this position type is just go ahead and give black the isolated queen's pawn and play against the isolated queen's pawn by taking here. In this case, I think this turns out okay for black. Bishop takes c5, maybe bishop g5 to pin the knight. He can push on with d4. A very interesting move that, white has given black the isolated queen's pawn, but hasn't gotten in that typical move e3 that's used to restrain the isolated queen's pawn, so it can be pushed forward. Then after this exchange, queen takes. Let's see, the knight could go to d5 and harass the queen. The chess engine likes white a little bit here, but looking at this, I think that black has decent play here. So I would not be afraid of this position with black. First of all, he got castled, so he's not in any trouble from that point of view. This bishop is going to be developed quickly. This isolated queen's pawn is well supported, and my e pawn is somewhat backward, so maybe you can pile up pressure on the e pawn. So there's ideas for black in this position. So I wouldn't necessarily take the computer's word here that white is much better. Well, it doesn't say much better anyway. It says slightly better. But anyway, I think that would be fine for black as well. The top choice on the database is another way of getting into an IQP position. I think this is a little better, so it's probably what should be played here. Bishop to g5. So threatening to just trade off this knight, pull the bishop away from defense of the c-pawn, and then just win a pawn. So this kind of provokes black into taking. So if you can provoke black into taking the isolated queen's pawn, then white gets to develop a piece, bring the knight forward supported by the queen to a good square. And then after the bishop gets kicked, I can drop back here to e3. And I think this is a good position for white. So in this position, I definitely would prefer to be white. And so I think that's probably the best way to play it. So I played a different move here. I played the move bishop to e3. This is also in the database. It's like the third choice or something. Not the best move according to the chess engine, but I think it's interesting. Basically, white is trying to force black to make a decision about these pawns. And if black takes, then I'll take back with the knight. And I have that kind of position that I was looking forward to in the other line, where I've got a well-posted knight in front of the isolated pawn, and all my pieces are looking pretty good at that point. So this pretty much forces the move c4. And that's the best move for black. So my opponent has been playing this well. although he played this somewhat reluctantly. I mean, this is kind of a concession because now these pawns are somewhat rigid, and this pawn is going to come under fire without the counterplay against the d pawn. I can't say totally without. You can get some counterplay on the d pawn, but it is shielded from direct attacks in this direction, so it has to be attacked indirectly. But maybe some combination of bishop and knight could be used to pressure my d pawn as well. But relatively speaking, I think it's easier for me to get pressure on his d pawn than for him to get pressure on mine. Let's see. And here I make the move that takes us out of the opening book. So the way to continue here, the best move according to the engine and also the chess opening book, is to play knight to e5. And this is a move I thought about. And well, if we give the main line first. Normally, white would develop with bishop e6, and then there's there's this very tactical line here. Knight takes c4, but after pawn takes, you get the piece back with d5, and this is an interesting position where maybe white has some slight edge, but that's the actual line in the opening book. I thought about this knight to e5 move in this position. I was wondering what to play here. And what I didn't like about knight e5 was I thought he could take it. But it turns out that this is not good. This exchange is not good for black because after I take, what's happened is I'm chasing his knight away from defense of this pawn. So the knight drops back. If the knight drops back, then I can just take on d5, and I'm just a pawn up and I'm better. So I didn't think of that, actually. I don't know why I didn't think of that. It's pretty obvious. Anyway, after d takes e5, knight to g4 is the recommended move from the chess engine. Looking at the bishop, but also preparing to round up this pawn if I grab this pawn. So bishop to d4 defends the pawn, and now bishop to e6, and then h3 kicking the knight, and the knight gets pushed back to an awkward square. So this looks like an interesting way for white to keep some kind of edge. It's kind of a peculiar structure where pieces are being used to blockade the pawns, but there's still pressure on this. There's still pressure on the d pawn. This bishop, it can move with tempo maybe at some time to bring even more pressure to bear on it. And I'm holding on to this advanced pawn for the moment. Let's see, materially it's just even, but this knight has been pushed back to an awkward square. So I think white's probably a little better in that position. So that's knight e5. That's really the move that should be played here. I played the move h3. This has the idea of stopping him from playing knight g4 so that he can't hit the bishop. So the reason I wanted to play that now is because I wanted to follow up with queen d2, which is going to block my bishop in. And so I'm just playing this move h3 to prepare queen d2. But, well, maybe it's not the most accurate move. And let's see. Let's continue on. Game is still in the range of about even, I would say. Let's see, he goes rook e8, and I go queen d2. This was my plan. He goes bishop to e6, so we're all getting our pieces out. I go bishop to g5 now, and I've decided if he kicks my bishop, I'm just going to trade it off. It's kind of running out of squares, and that's just what happens. He kicks it, I take, and he takes. And this did give him the bishop pair advantage, but I thought I still had some things going here. I'm going to be able to centralize my pieces. I go rook a to d1. See, he went queen d7, so he can bring a rook over. And also, queen d7 is looking at the h6 square, piling up on that. So I play the move king to h2, a pretty natural move. But, well, according to the chess engine, not the best. So I just wanted to show this line because it was so interesting. Instead of responding immediately, the chess engine would counterattack with e4. So, for example, if he grabs this, then I can take here and maintain some kind of material equality, but also with a with a big center. Although, I don't know, this pawn is under fire, but maybe, there's this idea of taking the bishop there with check and messing up his pawn structure too. So, complicated position. Another idea after e4 is for him just to play rook a to d8. That's the recommended line from the chess engine. Then e takes d5, bishop takes d5, and knight to e5. And well, once again, this line, the bishop has gotten distracted, so there's no pressure on h2, and I've managed to get my knight here to a good square, but it looks like it can get traded off. I don't know, complicated position, but the chess engine likes white. I was wondering why not... I guess if he takes here first, I'll just take back with the knight, and once again I have the idea of taking on f6 with check and messing up his kingside pawns. So anyway, in this position, e4 was a very interesting idea, and one I really did not think about, but I have to say it's characteristic. When you see this pawn structure, you naturally want to play e4 and just undermine it. That's going to be a key move in many lines in this kind of structure. So something to keep your eye out for if you're ever in a similar position. Anyway, I just played king h2, and then right here, black makes the first move that maybe might be considered a little bit inaccurate. The chess engine would just play very simply rook a to d8, and it likes black here. It's hard for me to say exactly why. It could be it likes black just because black has the bishop pair, and that's some kind of long-term advantage. When I look at this, I would not necessarily say black is better here. I would say it's a game that I'm happy to play with white. I still have ideas of undermining the center. I'm just going to be trying to figure out ways to get in that e4 push at the right moment. Black has ideas too. Black maybe can be thinking of expanding on the queen side like this and kicking my knight around. So there is going to be a bit of a race here. Then I have to get that e4 move in before he gets his pawn all the way to b4 and makes that knight move, because I need that knight to support the e4 push. So it could be that with most accurate play, black comes out a little bit ahead in that race, but it's not obvious to me. So at this point, I would still be happy to play this position with white. But anyway, for what it's worth, the chess engine prefers black here. But he didn't play this rook to d8 move. He played the move instead, bishop to f5. And like I said, it's a little bit inaccurate. I think his idea was to start opening up the e-file and get some pressure on this e-pawn, maybe try and encourage me to move that pawn forward. The thing about it is I don't want to move that pawn forward. This pawn on e2 wants to stay back here so that it protects these squares. It's be very awkward for me if he managed to post a knight on or a bishop on d3 there, and the bishop and that pawn is keeping a piece out of there. So I don't want to push that pawn forward until I can go all the way to e4. And so maybe that's a second idea of this bishop move. It puts a stop to my e4 move for the moment. But it has a weakness, and the weakness is that that this pawn is a little bit under-defended now. Only the queen is defending it. I have the knight attacking it, and I have this bishop as a potential attacker. So effectively, I can move this knight with tempo. So the natural move that suggests itself, and the move I spent a long time thinking about, was knight e5. And to be honest, I really felt I could not calculate that all the way to the end. I did the best job of calculating that I could. And I was talking to my opponent after the game, and he said also at this middle part of the game, he felt like he couldn't calculate everything as well. So I guess a position like this has reached the level of complexity that the typical B player is somewhat overloaded at this point. But I did the best. I mean, I did the best I could. So, I looked at this move, I looked at all the variations that I could foresee, and it seemed like I was coming out okay. I looked for all the different ways he might mess things up. There's some tricks here. There's when this knight moves, I have to worry about his bishop coming to this diagonal and kicking my queen. It can't go there now because the knight is there. But I mean, there's lots of complexity in this position, and it's just something to, if you want an exercise, maybe you could sit there and think about what you would do in this position, or what might happen after knight e5. But anyway, as I said, I calculated it the best I could. I couldn't see anything wrong with the move, so I went ahead and played it. And now my opponent makes the second kind of slight mistake. So the best move here, according to the chess engine, is knight takes. And then I have to take back. He takes with the bishop, and then I can take here. And this is kind of what I was expecting. You know, it's a trade of my d-pawn against his d-pawn, you know, accompanied by the exchange of pieces there. But I thought this would be a good position for me. There's still this tactical idea. Once I get this knight to d5, there may be cases where I can play knight to f6 check with an attack on the queen. So anyway, the chess engine would continue with rook a to d8, and then I could play this move e4, and I would really cement this knight into this square. So I think even though black has the bishop pair, I think I have the positional trumps, and the chess engine agrees. It's a slight edge for white already here. And so that's just because of his bishop f5 move that I was able to get that much of an edge. It's really just a positional edge, but it's something, you know, I'd be happy to play with. Anyway, so he makes a second slight mistake in that he takes with the bishop instead of the knight. And so at this point, I was actually able to calculate ahead far enough that I was able to find an interesting resource after the exchanges. So, well, this could be a little tactical exercise for you here. See if you can figure out the tactical idea that I was thinking of here in the resource that I had in mind. And go ahead and pause the video now if you want some time to think about it. Okay, I took with the pawn, of course. Yeah, I'm giving the answer away now, so last chance to pause the video. He takes back with the knight. And then this was my idea. I'm going to return to this idea of getting a knight on this square, but I first need to remove some of the defenders from the queen. So I kick the knight with this f4 move. He dropped back to g6. Then I take, and he plays the move rook to d8. And now this is the position I had imagined, and this is where I had already you know, come up with the idea of a particular move. So if you is your last chance to guess the move here. So what is White's next move in this position? Okay, pause the video if you want time to think. I'm going to give the answer away now. The move I played is e4. And I think this is a good move, and it's also good because I was able to see it in advance. So I knew that I had this e4 move as a resource in this position. So the idea is he can't really take that pawn. If he takes with the rook, then I'm just going to win the exchange. It's the exchange for a pawn, but that's still good for me. And if he takes with the bishop, then I have this idea. I have the knight f6 check idea, because that move pulls the bishop away from defense of the queen. After knight f6 check, he takes the knight, take the queen, he takes back, I take the rook. So I win a rook for the knight, and I've messed up his pawns on the king side. So what that means is that he's got to retreat his bishop. And for a while there, I was getting excited, thinking I could win a whole piece with this fork. But there's just no way to actually win a piece there, because the bishop can always trade itself for the knight. If I play the move f5, if I play f5, he plays bishop takes knight, and I can only take back one of the pieces, and he saves the other. So I don't win a piece. But just looking at this is still a good position for white. I've managed to build that big center and destroy black center. So I've gotten the kind of thing you look for against the Tarrasch. And secondly, his knight is in a bad spot. It has no good squares to go to. It can only actually go backwards at this point. So that combination gives white basically a winning edge at this point. So it's interesting if you think about it. There was really only two slight mistakes that black made. One was the first bishop f5 move, and then the second one was taking with the bishop instead of taking with the knight. And suddenly I have basically a winning advantage here. Let's see, I continued with queen a5. Basically I'm just getting my queen off of this file so that I'm reintroducing this threat of knight f6 check, so he has to do something about it. He played queen c8, just getting his queen out of the line of fire. Actually, the best move here, and black can still put up a fight, so maybe it was premature for me to declare this a win for white. The chess engine says he could play b6 here. So I guess, well, I could still do this trick with the knight, but then he gets my queen at the end. So I need to move my queen. And then, and also notice that his queen was defending the a-pawn in that line. And then, let's see, then he takes the knight. And I take back, and then he moves the queen to the side. White is still better here, but the material is even. I guess the biggest part of my advantage still is that he's got this knight, which is looking pretty sad over there. But I haven't managed to pick up any material yet. So the game would continue. Anyway, let's see. After queen a5, he didn't find that move. He played the move queen to c8, just getting out of the line of fire, which makes a lot of sense. And now I did some more calculating. I went ahead and grabbed the pawn on a7. So I guess there's one more little calculation check. If you might want to think about what happens after I take that pawn on a7, and what about his invasions? Right? He can trade and force some exchanges and invade to the second rank with his rook. So what's the idea for white in that position? Okay, yeah, pause the video if you want some time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away now. I went ahead and grabbed that pawn. I thought it was a safe grab, and the reason I thought it was safe, I'm giving up my good knight here for his bishop, but his knight is still a little bit out of play. Oh, let's see. I'm sorry. He took with the rook here. I took with the rook here. Yeah, I was just getting rid of more material, and then took back with the pawn. And then he brought his rook in to the second rank, getting active. And the resource I had spotted was this move rook f2. I noticed that my queen over here was actually defending the rook on the second rank, so I can continue to hold on to all of my pieces here, all of my pawns. And I mean, the b pawn could have been defended other ways too, but this seemed like the cleanest defense. So he has a choice of either trading or retreating, but I'm just winning materially at this point. He traded and went knight to e7, trying to get his knight back in the game, taking a look at my d-pawn. And I played queen to b6. So my idea is I want to help this pawn come forward. I also want to stop this pawn from coming forward. And I've got pressure with the queen and bishop on that pawn once the d-pawn comes forward, and then I'll get an outside passer with this pawn. So basically I'm blockading the b-pawn, keeping it fixed as a target. Let's see, he played queen to d7, getting his queen in front of my d-pawn. I pushed it on to d6, hitting his knight. Played knight to c8, and then there's one last move in the game, and then he resigned. So this is another slightly tactical move. There's of course many winning moves at this position, but there's one move that's best. So if you want to, for your final quiz, if you want to see if you can find the best move for white right here. Okay, yeah, I was very happy to find this move. It was queen to c7. And it's kind of, this pawn is under attack from two pieces, the queen and the knight. But if he takes with a knight, I'll take the queen, and if he takes with a queen, I'll take the knight. So it it defends that pawn. It threatens to trade off the queen, and if the queen drops back, the only square it can drop back to and that would still defend the knight would be over here at e8, and then I can push this pawn forward, forking the two pieces. So anyway, he basically loses the knight in this position. So he just resigned. I mean, if he moves the queen out of the way, then this cancel out. If he moves the queen out of the way somewhere along this diagonal, then I'm just pushing the pawn forward and queening. So he resigned at this point. So pretty interesting game, and I think the game I'm most proud of so far in this tournament. The first two games were nice wins, but they were helped by my opponents making some pretty big mistakes. Whereas in this game, the mistakes were pretty subtle. And although I didn't always play the most accurate move, as usual, I'm not a computer, still I think I played well enough to stay in the game, even if he had tried to take advantage of my little missteps. I was still had playable positions all along, and then and when Black made the first of his missteps, I was able to spot the ideas and take advantage of them. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this, and stay tuned for round 5. The tension is building. After round 4, my score is now 3.5 points out of 4. There's 3 players that are at that level or above. So there's one player that has a perfect score of 4, and there was another player that had a score of 3.5. So the next game is going to be Sunday morning, and one of the 2 players that has 3.5 points will face off against the player with 4 points. So stay tuned. I'll be bringing you that game soon. See you then. Bye.